All right, welcome back into the First and 30 Football podcast here. A week off to just kind of reset, recharge the batteries can sometimes feel like an absolute lifetime. But while I was taking a hiatus from making the content for you guys, the football thoughts, knowledge, consumption, etc., it just didn't stop. And there were three teams, three contenders to be exact, that just kept running through my head, and I just kept kind of questioning some of their moves this offseason. We obviously still have the NFL draft to come, so there's no grading these guys out or saying that it was a bad or a bust of an offseason completely yet. But there are three, and I want to stress this, contenders, because obviously when we talk about teams with question marks, you could say the Titans, the Browns, the Giants, but there's a reason for that. Those guys are picking 1, 2, and 3 in the draft. Those guys are nowhere close to being playoff teams at this point in time, let alone Super Bowl contenders. But the three teams that we're going to talk about in today's video, I do think in a perfect world could be viewed as Super Bowl contenders next season. But I do have some serious question marks about these teams where things currently stand. And the first team I want to talk about there is the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are a team that I was very, very high on going into last year. I thought that they were going to be the 1 seed in the AFC, partially because of just playing in the AFC South. I thought they had a real opportunity to win 13, 14, even 15 potential games. I thought the defense was going to be very, very good, which it was. And I thought the offense with Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, Stroud leading the way was going to be a juggernaut. Unfortunately for the Texans, we just didn't see many games with all of those weapons out there. I'm not even sure we saw one full complete game with all of those weapons out there, but I digress. The Texans last year were kind of just what they were the year before. A playoff team that's clearly good enough to win their division and good enough to make it out of wild card weekend. And that's not a failure per se, but I just had higher expectations. So now going into this offseason, while CJ Stroud is still on that rookie deal, I do think there is a little bit of pep in the step, a little bit of motivation to build a contending team before you start paying CJ Stroud. You look at the way that the money market is working right now. Stroud's contract's going to be north of $60 million a year, and we could be flirting with the $70 million a year range for CJ Stroud when it comes time to extend him. Versus right now, the guy's on a rookie deal. All the money in the world to spend on the roster. And they did some good things, don't get me wrong, but I do have some question marks, man, and it starts at the offensive line. Can CJ Stroud survive another season behind a bad Texans offensive line? Last year, PFF ranked them 26th in all of football. That simply is just not good enough for a Super Bowl contender. To put it in perspective for you guys, Patrick Mahomes, you guys watched the Super Bowl. You saw how pressured he was. CJ Stroud's entire season had a higher pressure rate than what Patrick Mahomes looked like in the Super Bowl. So if you watched that Super Bowl and you thought, man, Mahomes is getting rushed, that was Stroud every single week and then some. And with his offensive weapons not staying consistently out there in terms of Diggs tearing his ACL, Tank Dell missing time, Nico Collins missing time early on in the year, Joe Mixon having some injuries that he dealt with. It's a miracle that the Texans made it as far as they did, truthfully, offensively. And the sophomore slump that everybody talks about with CJ Stroud, I just think that you're not buying the context here. However, I don't know if the Texans made moves to make sure that that didn't happen again, because on paper, their offensive line is now worse. The Laremy Tunsil trade, they give Laremy Tunsil in a 2025 fourth to Washington and get back a 2025 third and seventh and a 2026 second and fourth. And while I think in a vacuum, that's excellent deal on a 31-year-old left tackle who last year became the most penalized player in all of football, and from all the reports out of the Texan side of things, just wasn't bought in. CJ Stroud himself said in a podcast, Laremy Tunsil, he gets the veteran treatment at practice. If he don't want to do something, he doesn't do it. And a big thing under head coach DeMeco Ryans for this Houston Texans team has been the swarm mentality. And I don't know the exact acronym, but it's about effort. It's about hustle. And at the end of the day, Laremy Tunsil apparently wasn't giving that. And neither was Kenyon Green. And Kenyon Green just wasn't even playing well, to be fair. They traded him to the Eagles, him in a 2025 fifth for CJ Gardner-Johnson in a 2026 sixth. And don't get me wrong, the Texans defense is a hell of a unit to brag about. I think that they have the potential to be the very best defense in all of football next year. Will Anderson Jr. is going to get Defensive Player of the Year attention. Danielle Hunter, who they just extended, is a Pro Bowl level edge rusher in football. CJ Gardner-Johnson, Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie, Kalen Bullock, Kamari Lassiter. Like, the secondary is absolutely loaded. Al-Shaair, Christian Harris, good linebacker play. They're a loaded defense. And they were top 5 last year, and I think they could be top 1 this year. But at the end of the day, what they are asking from CJ Stroud offensively to carry the load may be too much. Now, they have a draft to go off of, and they have some additional draft picks, and I do think that they will target potentially offensive line, at least getting some depth play. And they've brought in some veteran-esque players. But at the end of the day, when you look at Titus Howard and Blake Fisher as the guards on, or as the tackles, on this team, and you look at the interior line, and it's not that impressive. And you look at a team that moved on from its offensive coordinator and Bobby Slowick. While Slowick, Tunsil, and Green may not have been bought in, may not have been giving the effort, may not have been on the same page, who's to say that it can't get worse next year? That's my big concern. Was Laremy Tunsil heavily penalized? Absolutely. Was Laremy Tunsil taking practice days off? Probably. But at the end of the day, was he a top 3 left tackle in the sport and the only bright spot on your entire offensive line? That's also true. And now it is a makeshift offensive line with some real question marks. And those question marks continue to the wide receiver room. Because while last year I was very excited at the thought of Stephon Diggs with a chip on his shoulder, Tank Dell getting to be a wide receiver 3, Nico Collins, who had fully broken out the year before. Now we're looking at Nico Collins, who, yes, is still there, but we've seen when Nico's the only option, Houston's offense can struggle. And they brought in Christian Kirk. What does he still have? I'm not sure. I like the addition, but Christian Kirk is my number 2 option on my offense in terms of a passing game. Doesn't scream Super Bowl contender. At the end of the day, Houston's got time. They could bring back Diggs on a team-friendly deal. There's wide receiver talent available to be drafted, not just on day 1, but on day 2 as well. But Houston has to have a home run level draft at this point in time for me to fully believe that they're capable of competing with Kansas City, with Buffalo, and with Baltimore to get to the Super Bowl next year. The AFC has a big 3 that's been running things. And yes, it's well aware that it's been KC the last 3 years that has come out and gone to the Super Bowl. But I think when we look at the AFC as a whole, everybody would agree. Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore, that is your tier 1 Super Bowl contenders. That is your tier 1 AFC teams. Kansas City's been to the Super Bowl the last 3 years, but Baltimore has had a 2-time MVP, and Josh Allen was the MVP last year. And those teams have alternated who's been the 1 seed. And those teams have alternated home field advantage when playing each other in the playoffs. Houston, I believe, has the potential to make the jump there. But while the draft capital that was in the return for the Tunsil trade I love, especially for a guy who probably, the old Bill Belichick adage, get out a year early rather than a year late. Probably what Houston did there with Tunsil. He showed some signs of regression, get out a year early, and recoup a ton of value. It's just the value you got was mainly in the 2026 draft, and your window of opportunity with Stroud on the rookie deal is now. So I'm not sure if it was the best use of resources. Time will tell, and we'll see what Houston could do with the offensive line. But if it looks as bad as it did last year, I just don't see Houston being able to compete in an AFC at the level of this team can get to the Super Bowl. The next team I want to talk about is also one of these AFC teams that's kind of a fringe contender. We like what they did last year, but can they move up? And that is the Los Angeles Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers had a really, really good 2024 campaign, right? Jim Harbaugh comes in, completely flips the narrative. This team went from 5 wins to double-digit wins, a playoff berth, a really, really solid season out of Justin Herbert. The defense looks strong. Ladd McConkey, who you drafted, is a potential top 20 wide receiver at this point in time, and things are going well. They absolutely got obliterated by Houston in that playoff game, though. And what weakness did Houston expose on the Chargers? At the end of the day, they don't have the offensive weaponry to compete in a playoff game. They don't have the offensive pieces to go and compete with these high-level AFC teams when the chips are down and when the playoffs begin. Because throughout a regular season, you're playing some bad teams, so you can kind of hide that you don't have enough pieces and rely on Justin Herbert to just not make mistakes and win the game sometimes on the back of your defense or win the game on a running game. But when you go into Houston and face that defense, and I think it would have happened with Kansas City, with Baltimore, with Buffalo, etc., these top tier teams, the Chargers didn't have enough offensively to compete. Justin Herbert didn't have the ability to just be a magician and pull one out of the hat. Ladd McConkey was great versus Houston, but outside of him, there was no other option. And that's the truth of things there. And as we sit here today, outside of Ladd McConkey, for the Chargers, there is still no other option. And they had the opportunity to get pieces. They brought in Najee Harris, yes, but they lost J.K. Dobbins. And I think Najee's probably a little bit better for this Jim Harbaugh ground and pound offense where you want a guy that plays a full 16, 17 game season. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, that is not a needle moving upgrade, in my opinion. In terms of wide receiver talent, the most notable name you brought in is Mike Williams, who, listen, 5 years ago, that might have been exciting. Today, no. The Chargers don't have enough weaponry to compete, and they had the opportunity to get it. DK Metcalf was on the trade block, and not only on the trade block, but begging for the Chargers to come trade him. It was leaked. He wanted to play in a warm weather. He wanted to play on the West Coast. He wanted to play for a contender. There was something else in there too that he was like, I want to play for the Chargers. That is, he said, I want to play for the Chargers without saying, I want to play for the Chargers. And ultimately, Los Angeles did not go and get him. And I get it. The asking price was steep because you have to trade a day 2 pick and then give a guy $30+ million a year. But at the end of the day, the Chargers need an X wide receiver. They need one in the worst way. McConkey is a high-end slot wide receiver. And I feel as if in today's NFL media landscape, that slot wide receiver has a negative connotation to it. But that's not how I mean it. But that's where he plays. But you need an outside guy. And pairing McConkey with, you'd say he lacks in the size category, but with his route running, speed, ability to break plays away, ability to, hey, 3rd and 5, let's go to Ladd. That ability with DK Metcalf and his size, his athleticism, his speed, his big playability, what he is in the red zone. That duo would be excellent together. They would pair very well. Yes, there's a price to pay, but at the end of the day, this feels like we're taking the question mark of the draft rather than the known commodity. And at the end of the day, the question mark of the draft, if it works out, is DK Metcalf. You could have DK Metcalf and pay him DK Metcalf money, but you never know. That draft pick could be DK Metcalf. Do you see what I'm saying, though? When the best case scenario for your draft pick is he's DK Metcalf, and you could have just traded a later round draft pick for DK Metcalf and still had a first round pick. The Chargers, I felt like, could have closed the gap on Kansas City. And at the end of the day, as we currently sit here, I'm wondering if the Broncos are ahead of the Chargers because of the moves the Broncos have made to that defense. Because right now, in head-to-head games, I don't know how Los Angeles is moving the ball versus Denver. I just don't. And it's not that I think that Bo Nix is better than Justin Herbert, but I think the Broncos offense would be more successful against the Chargers defense than the Chargers offense would be against the Broncos defense as things currently stand. And then when we get to that point in time, Kansas City is still the dog in that division. And if I think Denver's better than Los Angeles, the Chargers are going to be playing a risky game trying to get into the playoffs in the AFC. Because let's just say Kansas City, Denver, Houston, Baltimore, Buffalo. That's 5 right there. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Miami, another AFC South team, whether it's Jackson. Like, we're unsure if the Chargers get in now. Herbert misses 3 weeks and your season's over. Whereas I do believe if they got a DK Metcalf, they got a Devontae Adams, they got one of these wide receiver ones that was available, we're talking about them versus Kansas City for the division. And I don't think we're there now. I just don't. And now you have to hit on draft picks again. And the thing is, the Jim Harbaugh mentality leads me to believe that unless Ted McMillan is on the board at 22, this team isn't taking a Luther Burden. This team isn't taking a Trey Harris. This team maybe takes a Tyler Warren. Maybe because of how versatile he is. Or Colston Loveland, Michigan guy. But I still think you're lacking an outside wide receiver, even if you go with one of those tight ends. So I do think the Chargers dropped the ball because I think potentially they could have gone into next year with the defense that they had last year, which allowed the least amount of points per game in the NFL. You know, it wasn't the best defense in terms of yardage, but they stopped you when it mattered because they're well coached. And you could have spent some second and third round draft picks on that side of the ball if you wanted to. And you could have had an offense that featured Justin Herbert, Lad McConkey, DK Metcalf, Tyler Warren, and Najee Harris. And we could have been talking about the Chargers as a Super Bowl team. And now I have some question marks about what this offense will be. We'll see what they do in the draft. Do they bring in a Stephon Diggs and Amari Cooper, a veteran wide receiver on a 1-year deal? Can they make this work? Maybe. But now, instead of being secure in this, we have questions. And the last team I want to talk about is the Green Bay Packers. And I've talked about this a little bit with the Chargers, but I think the Packers are at real danger of missing the playoffs next year due to the questions I have. And I know Packers fans, I know NFL fans, you're telling me, oh, I'm already crazy. Hear me out, walk with me for the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then give me your opinion. In a similar vein to the Chargers, I really do believe that the Green Bay Packers dropped the ball on getting a true elite wide receiver one. We heard, again, that they were in conversations with trading for DK Metcalf. Romeo Doubs and some later draft capital was on the board. But again, at the end of the day, we saw Pittsburgh was able to get him for a second-round pick. The Packers, while a second-round pick could have been a little pricey, you could have gotten there. And the Packers, I said this all last season. I hammered the drum even in the preseason. My big concern with them is they don't have the guy. They don't have a trustable weapon when the chips are down. They don't have the guy for Jordan Love to really depend on. You had to hear all offseason, the Packers have 4 wide receiver ones, Dobbs, Watson, Wicks, Jaden Reed. These are 4 elite weapons. And I said it then, I'll take the victory lap because I told you so. I was right. If you are leaving training camp telling me you have 4 wide receiver ones, all that tells me is you have 0 wide receiver ones. You would never hear the Vikings leaving training camp. We got 4 wide receiver. No, it's Justin Jefferson. Plain as day, that's what it is. Okay? That is an elite option. The Cincinnati Bengals, they, maybe now that Higgins was paid, they tell you 1A, 1B. We all know it's Jamar. Nobody knew who the best wide receiver on the Packers was. You had a bunch of different answers, even from Packers fans. Some were saying Dobbs, some Reed, some Wicks. It was none of them. None of them were the guy. And that killed them in the playoff game versus Philly. I truly believe that. They didn't have a guy they could rely on. They didn't have a guy that could match up with a cornerback one on a playoff caliber team. And they still don't. They weren't even interested in a reunion with Davante Adams, I saw reports say, which is absolutely crazy to me because he would have been perfect for this. Already a pre-existing relationship with the organization and Jordan Love, a clear-cut wide receiver one, a Z wide receiver so you could line him up anywhere and run a wide variety of sets. With Metcalf, true X, gotta be on the outside. With Davante, Jaden Reed misses time, we could play him more primarily in the slot. Romeo Dobbs misses time, Davante to the outside. Think of all the different looks you could give, and the Packers weren't even interested in a guy who was shown to produce at such a high level for their franchise and still has it? What are they doing? That is what it left me saying. What are the Green Bay Packers doing? Because their offense and their quarterback truly needs the wide receiver one. While I do believe the Chargers need one, Justin Herbert is talented enough to close that gap a little bit with wide receiver twos. I don't think Jordan Love is of the talent to not have a wide receiver one to succeed. It's okay, it's fine, but I don't think he's there. His decision making is a little suspect at times. And when he does get in a jam, he is turnover heavy. He is willing to throw the risky ball in the turnover. And when you don't have a dependable wide receiver one target, a safety net, a guy that you feel you could rely on, that becomes more often. But if on 3rd down and 6, there was a DK Metcalf, a Davante Adams, who Jordan Love trusted at a high level, and they consistently produce at a high level, I think the Packers offense would be a lot better. I think if you paired DK or Davante with Josh Jacobs and then Jaden Reed's the third offensive weapon on your team, we're talking about the Packers. That is the move potentially to, hey, this team could come out of the NFC. But as we stand now, with how good the NFC North is, I have question marks about, will the Packers make the playoffs? Because, let's call a spade a spade. The Lions were better than them last year. Both teams are basically running it back roster-wise. So the Lions, probably better than the Packers again. The Bears made a ton of moves to get better this offseason in the trenches. They have better weapons. They have an offensive-minded head coach now who, I don't know, maybe Ben Johnson is better than Matt LaFleur. I'm not willing to say that he is, but that potential is there. And the Bears beat the Packers to end last season. And if it wasn't for a blocked field goal to beat them twice last year, things would tell you that the Bears are at least going to progress and be better this year. And the Vikings were better than the Packers already last year. Now they go from Darnold, who's a vet, to essentially a rookie JJ McCarthy. And I do think there will be a learning curve there. But the Vikings roster, if you exclude quarterback, might be the best in the division. It's not to say that the Packers will miss the playoffs, but you wouldn't see me shocked if they finished 4th in the division. And while technically 4 teams can come from one division, you're telling me one of Philly or Washington is missing? And don't let San Francisco bounce back, because them and the Rams then we're talking about 2 NFC North teams missing, and I would certainly bet that it'd be one of the Packers then. They feel like a bottom 2 team in their division. I don't trust their offense to compete in the high leverage spots. What was it last year? Their record against playoff teams in the NFC for the longest time was like over. They were against the Vikings, the Lions, and the Eagles last year, 0-5. Against the high-end playoff teams that were good throughout the regular season, the Packers were 0-5. And if I'm a Bears fan, I'm sitting here saying the Packers should have been winless in the division. So this is a team that has big concerns based on their play last year and has massive question marks because they didn't answer any of them. They brought in Nate Hobbs, but I'm almost positive the team's moving off of Jair Alexander. They brought in Aaron Banks, and the Packers always have a good offensive line, but I didn't think offensive line was the problem last year. What have they done to improve on last year's roster that wasn't enough? I don't know. And going into the draft now, I have some real question marks about what the future of the Green Bay Packers holds.